I'd like to thank Anveshi for this opportunity to be here. It's really a place where I learned a lot about gender. Literally everything I know about gender comes from this space, and I will be ever grateful to Anveshi and all the senior leaders who mentored and guided us at that time for this. So it's a real pleasure and privilege to be here for me. Also to meet with lots of old friends. It's really been a happy time for me. Thanks a lot.
Shall we begin? One of the first things when people hear about the questions of somebody not being well, mentally ill as it were, one of the first things which people ask you is that person on medicines or not? It's like automatically the mental health question becomes a question of mental illness with a certain perspective which is almost common sense with most of us. Now, the first question I'd like to start, Bhargavi, with you is to ask you, from your perspective as an activist who've been struggling with respect to this perspective, what is your sense of its status now, and how would you, to just set a kind of background, how would you explain it to a group who is kind of uneven in its understanding of this whole mental health as a medical problem, of course? So how do you understand medicine's perspective on mental health? That is your take as well.
I just want to invite people to step in and start a dialogue already, not look to me for all the answers. We could have, because we are a small group, and also many of you I know are quite deeply engaged in this subject as well. So, whether it's disabilities or whether it is traditional healing, education, disability, speech and hearing. So we already have that pool of experience. So I invite everyone to kind of just step in, ask questions, and lead us on in the dialogue. Yeah, so I'm very aware that there is like the question that you raised, Tejaswini, it's like really about some personal quest to understand. And there are others, I suppose, with more academic, theoretical. So we are actually straddling this whole spectrum between experience and theory. And that, in fact, was the starting point for many of us. And at that point, I think Anveshi was really the space to nest and and to kind of just be here and reflect. So at that point, I remember I was totally destroyed by very compulsive, extraordinary depression. And I was looking at everybody in Anveshi, the books and everything, through a haze of depression, right? So it was really good at that point. Anveshi was the voice of reason. Of course, we rebelled against it, but I think it was like really helped us to clarify, to keep raising questions, not necessarily to arrive at some answers, but to just untangle that whole experience into different kinds of questions, both personal as well as relationship oriented, as well as the larger gender political. So, and that really helped me and some of our friends, dear friends. I remember Jaya particularly, and so some of us made sense of what this experience is, just by the engagement with the larger political question. So I really come from that point of view, where we began saying there is no such thing as mental illness, and it is all a product of society and patriarchy. I think for us that was so empowering at that point to know that there is no such thing as, because mental illness, you don't have blood tests. Even today you don't have, there is no, if you want to diagnose malaria, for example, then there would be clear protocols, there would be biological, physiological markers, and you would be able to identify them at some path lab or the other. Whereas for mental illness, even though it's considered by the WHO as an impairment for many years, there are no such markers. The diagnostic part of it continues to be really behavioral, like, so it's like based on behavioral symptoms without any um, equivalence or let us say algorithm. There is no algorithm that can convert this into a biological, physiological marker. So the disease part of it was always and continues to be in question. So is there a mental illness? And there are a variety of answers to it, particularly in post-colonial states like India, where the legal aspect comes in a big way. Right? So in this mess, okay, it is legal, it is social constructionist, it is gender patriarchal, it is all. So what happens to all the tears that I was, dropping? What about all the, my body felt like it weighed 2 tons, not the 70 kilos or 120 kilos I was at the time due to compulsive eating, right? So, but there was no, you say all of this, but yet you have to deal with this body and with this mind which is ever so restless. It's just ever so restless. It doesn't sleep, it doesn't, it cannot focus, you can't read a book through 4 pages. So it's like really, and for me I was like, say, depression, but there are other friends who had voice hearing experiences, heavy overload of perception, on their body, their skin, flashing lights, voices really, in their heads, and a number of other such very, very intimate, very, very private, difficult to talk about, difficult to find words for those kinds of experiences. So having all this, it still didn't explain why the hell do I wake up as if I want to die. Why is it that when some days I do actually want to die and make some efforts in that direction? So those are like questions that no theory can answer. So we knew that there is something really gross over here. This is not a part of me. I remember in my childhood days, I was a happy child. I was like, I had fun, and now I've lost the capacity for being happy, having fun, being in the company of people, and I just want to withdraw under a table or quietly go inside the earth. So that remained unexplained, and so we felt that there needs to be another experiential language, something that we could catch using a feminist perspective or feminist methodology. Okay, what is this experience? How do voice hearing people go through their lives? And so that quest has also remained through, for example, through the disability movement work that we've been doing, because someone who's blind, there is a set discourse about being blind. Okay, this person is blind, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, you have to do these things and that person will be okay. And we understand your blindness and you understand that we are not blind and we will not respond in the same way. But that is not there in the case of someone who's going through whatever it is, right? So there are those issues, and so we continue to engage with the experiential language of madness. I'm not comfortable, as I told Srivats also, I'm not comfortable anymore with the use of the word madness, which is really the language of resistance which came up during the 90s in India. I was very much with that language of madness. But over a period of time, that's kind of shifted into other areas of concept building. And bringing it to match, the experience in a way that I feel today madness does not. So you must ask me more questions, because maybe I already have gone into the abstract. So what I want to say is that there is a hardcore experience of personal distress, which is not like any disease that I know of. It's not like malaria, it's not like blood pressure, it's not like diabetes. It's not like any of that. It's something that is happening over here, but it consumes the rest of your body. So there is something like that, right? And mental illness is not a suitable term. Madness is not a suitable term, in my view, as of today. But it is there, right? And so that is what I want to say. And many times in families, when something is like gross in that way, then we are like, okay, man, how do we find the words for it? What words? The best is to ask. So always the conversation begins over there. Okay, what's going on? Can you find some small words for this? This is what we do in our peer support work, and the work that Yeah, so that is one part of the answer. Do you want to reflect on this, Shiva?
I think each of us can go on. I also have a question, but yeah, each of us can. Who wants to?
I don't know if you want to speak. Yeah. Towards your formulation of like when you hear somebody's mad and it goes directly to is this person on medication? I'm wondering how widespread is that? In a particular milieu, you would probably have that. I think the problem really is even the recognition that there is a problem, or identifying it, naming it, or understanding it. That barely happens. It doesn't enter this. This is my sense. I mean, are they going to a Baba, or like what are you doing? Those would be those, not necessarily a Baba, but then what kind of support are you seeking? What is wrong? Do that, do this. You just get a whole lot of suggestions rather than.
Yeah.
That was my sense.
Can I respond to that?
Sure.
Yeah, so where is it happening? You know, this whole, you're talking about medication, but where are the medicines? You know, who is doing this? Because around us we don't see so much, it's not very palpable, right? But we have all, in recent times, at least in the last 10 years, we have taken up arms against this whole movement called global mental health movement. It's been a big target for us. Now, global mental health movement was started in the UK, again very much post-colonial, even today, and they set all the rules for what should be happening, you know, in governments on mental health. Very much global mental health is active in Commonwealth nations, which are post-colonial. Specifically India, because one of the top leaders of this global mental health movement is an Indian psychiatrist.
Vikram Patel.
Yeah, Vikram Patel. And also there are many others in India who are, you know, fueling that fire of global mental health. And one of the key agendas of global mental health is to fill the treatment gap. That is the slogan word for the global mental health movement. Point being that they are talking about alarming rates of increase in mental disorders, particularly, and this is a concern for all of us who are working with marginalized groups, you know, whether it's the queer community or whether it's the, you know, the Muslim community, the Dalit communities, the women living in poor conditions, you know, in different slums of India, children, you know. So they're talking about really the very close link between marginalization, dropping out of development, and mental illness. So and this is very true of the suicide, the farmer suicide issue. It's very, very strong. So again, we're talking about a really marginalized, excluded community which is excluded from national policy or state policy. And then the flooding starts to happen of medications, psychiatric medications. Anyone who is under the new law also, anyone who is suicidal runs the risk of being put in a mental institution involuntarily, you know, under the new law. Old law did not have this provision. So if anybody is suicidal, and we see lots of suicide, as you know, among children in schools, among, you know, the poor in bastis, you see lots and lots of suicide. So that is the medicalization that one is afraid of.
There's a kind of galloping trend towards medicalization in many areas.
Really, and you might want to know that in Andhra alone, you know, since the Ervadi accident happened in 2001, when there was a fire and all that became a big human rights issue. The Supreme Court took it up, so moto, and then there was lots of, you know, reforms, so to speak, of the mental health system. What eventually happened was they opened the doors for private business to come in. Over the 10 years, there is a phenomenal rise in mental institutions like never before. Andhra alone, the last I saw in 2009, almost like 7 years ago, the number of institutions in Andhra is 108 or 110. All private institutions, no access, we don't even know what's going on inside of them until somebody publishes a news report saying that, you know, abuse ho raha hai, kuch ho raha hai. So that is the status. So somewhere there is expansion of these kinds of things, and we, for whatever reason, it doesn't seem to be a visible thing. It doesn't seem to. Part of the reason is also perhaps because when somebody is there in the family, we say, okay, let's go to a psychiatrist. I mean, let's go to a gynec for some problem, so let's go to a psychiatrist. So we don't make that connection that a health patient and a mental health so-called patient are two distinctly different categories. No health patient will be subject to torture in the actual fact of an admission into a hospital. They'll be treated like if somebody is having a cardiac event, need to go for angioplasty or something, or even just high blood pressure and need a hospital admission. There would be, it would be voluntary, right? People would rally around this person, they would say, oh my God, we've got this serious problem now, we have to take you to the hospital, let's pack up, what can he eat, should we pack some fruits, perhaps something, well, let's go like this, and then the ambulance would come and they would be very tenderly carried into the hospital. The mental hospital admission is something completely different. It's like really voluntary by force, involuntary by force. And see, the recent mental health care bill really provides linguistic sophistry, in how to describe involuntary admission. They are calling it dependent admission, right? But if you have to take someone into a hospital without their knowledge, without their consent, at the will of the parents or the psychiatrist and not at the will of the person, how would you do it except by physically manhandling them? How would you do that? Supposing you say, oh, you must go to the mental hospital. If I was, okay, I have blood pressure, you say, okay, I'm your father, mother, whatever, and you have to go, yes, I agree with you, I go. And you say, you're mentally ill now, you have to go to the mental hospital. I say, no. And I say, no, you're really misbehaving and this and that, and you really, lost it, and you have to go. And I say, no. How would you take me there then? You'll say, okay, some persons will come today for malaria treatment, ensure that you take that, that shot. And I may have questions about malaria treatment. Why should I get a shot? And why should I be the only one in the family to get a shot? This has happened now, many times this happens like this only. They'll tell you some shot and then they'll be sedate you. They'll put you on a stretcher. You will be isolated in your own home and then they will take you. So involuntary commitment, very often when there is this legal sophistry within a law, you don't figure out exactly how they will do this. But this is the case. This is how they do it, and these 108 institutions do this. And the strange part is the state has handed over its power to arbitrate the right to liberty to private parties. Yeah, because you're depriving someone of liberty. This is a constitutional matter. So without really doing a lot of legal process or judicial process about this handover, so they have just given, this power, to arbitrate right to liberty to private psychiatrists, private institutions and family members. So this is really a cause for worry. Yes, I don't know how I arrived at this point.
Very good. Shall we just go? Yes, to the correct point, but shall we just go ahead to the next system, or you want to continue on the medicine angle?
I had one thought, which was something which Bhargavi said towards the beginning about needing an experiential language for describing that subjective experience of distress. I think that was very powerful. And somewhere, I don't know if it might be useful, but I was just thinking that a lot of these difficulties or issues also arise because people are speaking different languages. So the moment one starts from a language of mental illness, then there's a certain route which one follows. Whereas, as you say, not everyone goes to that route. Some, will go to a local healer or a Baba because there's a different language, there's a different way of talking about distress. And then you touched upon other possible alternative terms, madness, which is also unsatisfactory, So I don't know if it might be useful to sort of, maybe think a little bit about what are these different, terms, madness, mental illness, distress. I mean, you mentioned personal distress, and for me, I think personal distress is a useful way to sort of enter into the subjective experience, because the moment one starts through the lens of mental illness or madness, I mean that's already framing someone's responses within a certain in a certain lens. Whereas distress keeps it at the level of subjective experience, and it sort of does not. So I don't know if or any other possible terms, psychosocial disabilities. I mean.
Yeah, so that's actually that question comes later on that list.
It'll come.